After getting married, the son throws his own mother out of the house, saying, "Only my wife and I will live here. Find somewhere else to live." Margaret had always been a woman of calm gestures and gentle presence. Her voice was soft, her steps always measured, and there was a rare type of patience in her gaze that only those who truly love learn to cultivate. From a very young age, she decided that her priority would be her family, even if it meant giving up her own desires. She dedicated her youth to the home, but it was with the birth of Alexander that she found her true purpose. When her husband suddenly passed away, leaving her a widow with an 8-year-old boy, Margaret had no time for prolonged mourning. The pain she felt was kept in silence, swallowed between daily tasks and sleepless nights, because now she needed to be everything to her son: mother, father, protection, and guidance. She learned, with effort and courage, to bear the weight of 2 roles without ever allowing sadness to make her hard. Even on the most difficult days, she maintained a smile for Alexander, as if wanting to ensure he never noticed the emptiness left by his father's absence. Alexander, however, was never an easy child. He was introspective, more observant than his age should have allowed, and from a young age he showed an emotional distance that unsettled her. Although Margaret, with her heart willing to forgive anything, always found a gentle explanation for it. She thought that behavior was just the way the boy dealt with the loss, a reflection of childhood grief, something time would heal. So, even as he grew and became increasingly cold and indifferent, she insisted on seeing him with understanding eyes. She justified the lack of affection with loving theories, believing he had his own way of loving. And so she continued, raising him with absolute care, giving up desires, postponing plans, and betting all her strength on the future of that only child, the one who had become her reason to continue. When Alexander entered into a serious relationship, Margaret tried with kindness to get closer to the young woman he had introduced as his girlfriend. However, from the very beginning, she felt a subtle barrier around her. The young woman maintained a formal, correct education, but was never welcoming. The meetings were brief, the words measured, and there was no invitation for Margaret to become part of what was beginning to form. Still, she said nothing. She preferred to believe that with time she would gain space, that the young woman, like her son, just needed time to recognize in her a positive presence. When she learned about the engagement, it wasn't from Alexander, but from casual comments he let slip. There was no request for help, no invitation for preparations. She watched everything from a distance, almost as a spectator of a film whose script she didn't know. She wanted to participate but didn't want to force her presence. She chose, once again, to remain discreet, believing that respect was the only way to show love when affection was denied. On the wedding day, Margaret dressed with sobriety. She chose a simple dress, carefully combed her hair, and put on an old brooch that carried memories of her late husband. She arrived at the ceremony venue with a heavy heart, feeling out of place. People were greeting each other, laughing, taking photos, but few approached her. When she saw Alexander at the altar, her eyes filled with unshed tears. She was proud of him, but she felt a difficult-to-explain emptiness. The hug she received was brief, the touch cold, as if they were just fulfilling a protocol. Even so, she smiled, both outwardly and inwardly, keeping alive the hope that this new chapter in her son's life might bring him some emotional maturity, perhaps make him look back with more gratitude. Margaret still believed that the love she had planted would one day bear fruit. She preferred not to see the indifference written on his face. Once again, she chose to protect herself with the faith that he would change. Margaret returned home at the end of the ceremony with a heavy heart, her feet dragging on the empty sidewalks. The dress she had carefully chosen now seemed colorless, and the old brooch on her chest heavier than ever. Inside the house, the silence was almost an echo of what she felt inside. She sat in the armchair in the living room, the one she used to sit in on nights when she waited for Alexander to return from school. She stayed there, motionless, staring at the walls, feeling the weight of the loneliness that was not new. But that night seemed final. She turned on a faint light, took off her shoes, and remained there, as if waiting for something. Perhaps a gesture, a word, anything. But what came hours later was very different. She heard the sound of a key turning in the door. It was late. Margaret got up slowly, adjusted her blouse, and went to the hallway. The door opened and Alexander entered, pushing 2 rolling suitcases firmly. His eyes didn't look for hers. His face showed neither exhaustion nor joy, just the usual coldness, now mixed with a strange determination. Margaret watched in silence for a moment, trying to understand. "Alexander?" said Margaret in a low voice, surprised to see him there so quickly. "Are you staying here tonight?" "Yes," said Alexander, dropping one of the suitcases on the floor. "Actually, I'm moving in here, my wife and I." Margaret furrowed her brow, confused. "Moving in here? But what do you mean? Don't you have a house of your own?" "This is our house now," said Alexander, still not looking at her directly. "From today on, only she and I will live here." The words hit like a dull punch. Margaret felt her body lose its balance internally, but she remained standing, sustained by an instinct of protection that she still didn't fully understand. "But, Alexander, this is my house, the house where you grew up. I live here," she said, trying to stay calm, even with the knot tightening her throat. "You're going to need to find somewhere else to live," said Alexander, finally looking at her, his tone icy. "We can't go on like this. I need my space. We need it." Margaret blinked several times, trying to process the words. "Somewhere else. But my son, I have nowhere to go. This house is mine. It's where I've lived my whole life with you. It's where your father, it's where everything happened." "You have friends," he replied, unmoved. "I'm sure someone can help you. You won't be on the streets." "Friends?" she repeated, more to herself than to him. "Are you really asking me to leave my own house? Are you kicking me out?" "I'm not kicking you out," he said, with even colder detachment. "I'm just telling you that living together has become impossible. You've always interfered too much. Now it's time for you to have your life and for me to have mine." Margaret took a step back, trying to understand where it all began. "Interfered too much? I never wanted to bother you, Alexander. I lived for you. I dedicated my whole life so you could have everything. Well, now I want to live my way," he said, opening one of the suitcases and starting to pull out clothes. "Enough. You'll find a better place for you. Quiet, peaceful. You've always liked peace, haven't you?" "This house is mine, Alexander," Margaret said, her voice wavering between firmness and disbelief. "It's in my name. You can't just send me away." Alexander looked at her for a second, then looked away as though preparing a sentence. "Actually, I can." Margaret furrowed her brow. "What do you mean, you can? You know very well this house is mine. All of this was built with my effort. It's registered in my name, you know that." "Not anymore," he said flatly. She took a step forward, confused. "What are you talking about?" "A few weeks before the wedding, I asked you to go with me to the notary," he replied, his tone so calm it seemed rehearsed. "I said it was paperwork related to the ceremony, and you signed." Margaret stood frozen, not understanding immediately. "You signed the papers to transfer the house to my name," he continued. "Now, legally, the house is mine." For a few seconds, Margaret couldn't breathe. The floor seemed to have vanished beneath her feet. She felt heat rise to her face, then a sharp cold run down her back. She pressed her fingers to her chest, as though trying to hold something inside her that threatened to break. "You did this to me," she whispered, her eyes wide. "You made me sign without telling me what it was." You would have made it difficult, he said, without a trace of remorse. I needed to do it my way. It was easier this way. You lied, Margaret said, her voice now low, choked. You lied to me. You deceived me. I made a decision. You need to accept it and move on, he said, with the same unbearable coldness. It's going to be fine. Margaret stood still for a few seconds, her eyes fixed on a lost point in the room. It was as if her mind needed time to catch up with what her heart had already felt. When she finally turned, she didn't say anything more. She walked silently down the hallway, her steps heavy, her body carrying something heavier than its own weight. She entered the bedroom and opened the closet with trembling hands. She grabbed a small suitcase, placed it on the bed, and began to pack some clothes with restrained gestures. Then she went to the dresser where she kept her old photographs, the few memories of her husband, yellowed newspaper clippings, carefully folded letters over the years. Everything was placed into a cloth bag. Her movements were slow, almost ceremonial, but there was firmness. She still hadn't cried, not yet. Alexander watched her from the doorframe, arms crossed. No need to make a scene. You've always been dramatic. You never understood anything, she said, turning slowly. I never wanted anything but love from you. Well, that's it, he said, grabbing his phone and starting to type something. Good luck. I hope you find a place. She walked through the house, touching the furniture as if saying goodbye to every wall, every object. When she reached the door, she looked at him one last time. You killed what was left of me today, Alexander, and the worst part is you don't even realize it. He didn't respond. He just turned his face. Margaret left. The night was still dark, but now it weighed in a different way. Her steps were dragged, her soul in pieces. She walked through the streets aimlessly until the name came as a whisper of survival. Melissa. Her friend's house was a few blocks away. When she arrived, she knocked slowly on the door. She waited. The light turned on. Melissa appeared in a robe, her eyes squinting as if she had just woken up. But when she saw Margaret, her eyes widened and she ran to her. Margaret, what happened? My God, come in. Come in now. Margaret entered without saying a word. She just sat on the couch and collapsed. The tears that hadn't come before now flowed uncontrollably. He kicked me out, she said between sobs. He deceived me, Melissa. He deceived me. Calm down, friend. Breathe. Tell me everything. Your hands are cold. Want some water? Tea? He made me sign the house over to him. Said it was paperwork for the wedding. I didn't read it. I trusted him. He deceived me. Melissa sat next to her, hugging her tightly. This can't be happening. He wouldn't do this. He's your son, Margaret. He did, and now I have no home, I have no son. I only have this, she said, pointing to the bag in her lap. You're staying here, as long as you need, no discussion. This house is yours too. You're not going through this alone. Margaret closed her eyes, as if trying to erase everything. Why did he do this to me, Melissa? What did I do wrong? You didn't do anything, nothing, said Melissa, with a mix of anger and sadness. He's the ungrateful one, the insensitive one, and this isn't going to stay like this. Margaret just shook her head, exhausted. I don't want revenge. I just wanted love. I know, said Melissa, squeezing her hand, but now you need care. And I'm here for that. By Melissa's side, under the soft light of the small room, she felt a warmth that didn't come from the body, but from the silent presence of someone who still cared. She slept little that first night, if she even slept. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling, and her mind kept returning to Alexander's face, to the coldness of his voice, to the exact moment when he said that the house was his now. She went over each word, as if trying to rewrite a nightmare, but unable to change the ending. In the morning, Melissa made coffee and buttered bread, but Margaret only held the cup in her hands, without drinking. You need to react, said Melissa, sitting across from her. You can't just accept this as normal. Margaret just shook her head slowly. He's my son, Melissa. My son. A son who stole from you, who deceived you, who turned his back on you. You can't keep calling this love, Margaret. I'm not defending what he did. I still can't believe he really did this. But he did. And now you're here, with a suitcase in the corner of the room, sleeping on the couch. Do you understand that? He took everything from you, and he's not even sorry. Margaret looked at the floor, her eyes watery. What do you think I should do? Fight. At least try. Samuel can help you. He's a lawyer. He's handled similar cases. I can talk to him. Margaret hesitated. I don't want to drag this on. I don't want to turn this into a war. This is already a war, Margaret, and he started it. A few days later, Melissa called her son. Samuel arrived early in the evening, with a notebook under his arm and a serious expression. He greeted his mother, then turned to Margaret with respect and attention. They sat at the table, and he listened to everything from the beginning without interrupting. So he took you to the notary, saying it was about the wedding? Samuel asked, taking notes. Yes, Margaret replied, looking at her hands. I trusted him. I signed without reading. And the papers were for the house transfer? He said they were later. He said the house is now in his name. Samuel nodded, thinking, this is serious. It's manipulation, inducing error, falsifying documents if he forced you to sign without knowing the content. There's a legal way to contest this, yes. It's not guaranteed. It'll be a long, painful process, but there are chances. Margaret looked him in the eyes. And even though he's my son, doesn't that make it more complicated? It complicates it emotionally, but legally, no. No one has the right to deceive another person, to take possession of a property, whether it's a mother, brother, or stranger. What he did, Margaret, is a crime. She remained silent, her heart heavy. I need to think. Of course, Samuel said. But don't think too long. Every day that passes, he feels more secure. And every day you stay silent is one more day away from justice. In the following days, Margaret walked through Melissa's house as if floating. She didn't take up space. She barely ate. She spent hours sitting on the porch, staring into nothing. Melissa insisted that she eat, that she sleep well, that she talk, but Margaret seemed distant. You're too quiet, Melissa said one night. You need to talk. You need to get this out. I still hear his voice in my head, Margaret replied, saying it was necessary, that it was easier this way, as if I were an obstacle, an inconvenience, because he sees you as someone he can use. But you're not that, Margaret. You are a whole woman, and no one has the right to tear you down like that. Margaret breathed deeply. He was everything to me. I dedicated my life to him. I gave up everything, never complained, never. And now he treats me like I'm nothing, because he doesn't know what love is. And maybe he never did, said Melissa, but you do, and that's what will give you the strength to fight back. Days later, Margaret called Samuel. He came immediately. They sat in the kitchen, the three of them. Margaret took a deep breath before speaking. I want to go to court, she said, her voice firm. I want to try. Samuel nodded, not surprised. You're doing the right thing. Even if it hurts, she added, even if he hates me forever. He already hates you, Margaret. He just hasn't told you yet, said Melissa harshly. But you don't need him. You need yourself. The process was initiated a few days later. Samuel gathered documents, sought notary records, listed witnesses. Margaret signed the papers with trembling hands but determined eyes. This began a new fight, not just for the house, but for the dignity that had been stripped from her. Months passed. The first hearing was scheduled. Margaret arrived, with Melissa accompanying her, holding her hand tightly. When they entered the room, she saw Alexander sitting at the back, with a lawyer beside him. He didn't look at her. "Are you ready?" Melissa whispered. "No," Margaret replied. "But I'm here." The hearing began. Alexander's lawyer spoke first. He said Margaret had signed the documents voluntarily, that the living situation between them had become unsustainable, that she had herself said she wanted more peace. Margaret listened to everything without looking away. Then it was her turn. Samuel presented the facts, explained the manipulation, showed the dates, described the emotional situation that led her to sign without reading. Margaret spoke with a choked voice, but clearly. "I trusted my son. I never imagined he could do this to me. I signed because it was him, because he was my boy, because I still believed he loved me." Alexander remained motionless. No reaction, no emotion. Melissa was called as a witness. She spoke with indignation and firmness. She described the night when Margaret arrived at her house with a suitcase and shattered eyes. She said Margaret had nowhere to go. She was in shock, that she would never have willingly given up the house. Each hearing was a blow, each session a painful reminder. But every time Margaret stood up to speak, she felt something inside her rise again. Little by little, she regained the voice she had lost, the right to say she was hurt, betrayed, deceived. Alexander, on his part, maintained his cold demeanor. His lawyer tried to dismantle the arguments with cold documents, dates, records, all put together to make it seem like Margaret knew what she was doing. But she resisted, and she wasn't alone. Melissa went to all the hearings. Samuel was tireless, and little by little the truth gained form. Margaret didn't want revenge. She wanted justice. And above all, she wanted to look in the mirror again and recognize the woman who had raised a son with so much love, even though he had turned into something unrecognizable. The last hearing came on a cloudy day. Margaret woke up early, took a calm shower, and chose a simple outfit. She tied her hair as she had done in previous hearings and put on the old brooch she used to wear for important occasions, no longer as a memory's adornment, but as a symbol of resistance. Melissa was already ready when she left the room. They didn't say much. The silence between them had already become intimate, comfortable, and on that day, more than ever, there was nothing to explain, just to feel. They arrived at the courthouse a few minutes before the scheduled time. Samuel was already waiting for them at the entrance, his expression firm, his gaze respectful. He shook his mother's hand, then Margaret's, saying only, "Today it ends." She nodded with a discreet gesture. They entered the hearing room without exchanging words. The atmosphere was heavy. The judge was already waiting for them. Alexander was also there, sitting next to his lawyer. Margaret glanced in his direction for a moment, but he kept his eyes lowered, as if he didn't even have curiosity about the outcome. The room remained silent until the judge began reading the decision. Considering the facts presented, the testimonies gathered, and the evidence of manipulation exercised on the plaintiff by the defendant, this court rules the nullification of the property transfer. The house in question is to be returned to Margaret's name with immediate effect. Margaret didn't show any reaction at first. There was no celebration, no visible relief. It was as if her body needed time to understand that this battle had indeed come to an end. She felt Melissa squeeze her hand tightly. Samuel maintained his serious expression, but his eyes revealed the relief of someone who knew what that victory had cost. Alexander didn't say anything. He got up as soon as the judge finished reading, adjusted his suit, and left the room without looking back. Margaret followed him with her eyes for a few seconds, waiting for one last gesture, any sign of humanity. But he passed by her, as if she were a stranger. "He's no longer here, Melissa," Margaret murmured, still seated. "The son I raised isn't there anymore." "Maybe he was never there," replied Melissa with sadness. "But you're here, and you won." "I don't know if this is winning," said Margaret, getting up slowly. "I only know it's over." That night they returned to Melissa's house. Margaret didn't say much, but before going to sleep, she said a phrase that lingered in the air. "Tomorrow I'm going back home." And that's exactly what she did. The house, however, was no longer the same. The walls seemed colder, the furniture older, and the rooms too quiet. Margaret entered alone, breathing deeply. She touched everything as if it were new, even though she knew every corner like the back of her hand. In the first few days, Melissa and Samuel came almost every day to help her. There were things to rearrange, Alexander's items to discard, rooms that needed painting. Margaret decided to change some colors, move the furniture around, open the windows she used to keep closed. She wanted to start over, even if she didn't know exactly how. "This room needs life," said Melissa, observing the old couch. "Let's change it," replied Margaret. "I want to take away everything that smells of the past." Samuel accompanied the renovations lightly. "If you want, I can call someone to review the installations." "What if even the wires are tired of all this?" Margaret smiled for the first time in weeks. "Maybe. Everything needs to breathe again." Over time, the days found a new rhythm. The afternoons were filled with small tasks, trips to the market, conversations in the yard. Margaret relearned how to be at home, not as the mother who waited for her son to return, but as a woman who rebuilds her own place in the world. She never heard from Alexander again. Sometimes, on the longest nights, she thought about him, not with anger, but with a kind of sadness that didn't hurt like before. A gentle pain, one that she had already accepted that certain wounds never fully heal. "Do you miss him?" Melissa asked one afternoon while they prepared tea. "I don't know," Margaret replied, stirring the sugar calmly. "I miss what I imagined he would be." "You didn't make a mistake with him, Margaret. He chose to be who he is." "I know, and I chose to survive it." Sundays became a tradition between them. They spent hours in the yard, watering plants, reading in silence, exchanging memories with long pauses between one sentence and the other. Sometimes neighbors came over, other times it was just the two of them, listening to the sounds from afar, the wind rustling the leaves, time passing without hurry. Margaret enjoyed the new routine. There was something peaceful about it, something she had never truly known. She was getting older, yes, but without bitterness, with serenity. Every corner of the renovated house now carried a new story, free from the lies that had tried to settle there. "You did everything you could," Melissa said one day while cutting fruits in the kitchen. "I did," Margaret replied, "and still I lost." "You lost what didn't do you any good. What's left now is what matters." Margaret looked around. She felt the smell of tea, the sound of the pot on the stove, Melissa's footsteps around the house. She felt at peace, a peace without euphoria, without noise, a solid peace. On the shelf in the living room, she kept only one photograph, her with Alexander still a child in her arms, smiling for the photographer. She never had the courage to throw it away, not because of the attachment to what he had become, but out of respect for what she had been. "You're going to live well here, Margaret," Samuel said during a visit. "There's more life in this house now than there's ever been." "Because now it's real," she replied. "Now it's just me, and that no matter how sad it may sound, is freedom." And so the months passed, without great changes, without spectacular endings, just real life, with its small cycles of rebuilding. Margaret learned to walk again through the rooms, to lie down without expecting anyone, to get up without hearing someone else's steps. And more it felt right. Time did what time does best. It moved forward. It took with it the sharpest pains, leaving only the faint trace of what once hurt deeply, but now was just a memory. Margaret grew old there, in the house where she once believed she would have a family. And, in a way, she had one. Not the one she dreamed of, but the one life gave her. A loyal friendship, a constant presence, and the reflection of herself restored in the mirror. The wound never completely closed, but she learned to live with it, without hiding it, without blaming. because even wounded she rose again, and in the end what remained was what she valued most: truth, affection, and respect. And that, for Margaret, was worth more than any title of ownership. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.